Hi everyone, thanks for joining today. We're going to be talking about Chief of Staff and specifically what Chief of Staff is like in a startup. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rich, I'm the founder of Move Me On, and we run a platform globally, movemeon.com, that's specific to consultants and people who've done consulting, helping them discover opportunities, but also with career advice. And I'm really happy today to be joined by Aidan, who is in a Chief of Staff role. And I'll let Aidan introduce himself.
Thanks, Rich. So yeah, I'm Aidan. I'm Chief of Staff here at Penfold, a modern digital pension challenger based in the UK. I've been Chief of Staff at Penfold for 18 months, and before that, then 3 years after university at LEK in a strategy consulting role.
Awesome. Thanks for coming to say hi. We're going to jump straight in, Aidan. Chief of Staff is a role that is very popular and sought after, but outside in it can be a little bit vague and a little bit hard to understand, like, what do you actually do? So I guess my first question is, if you could summarize what your job is, what are your main responsibilities? I think that'd be super helpful.
Absolutely. So the first thing to say about kind of the role is it's super dependent on the company you're at, the stage they're at, size. So I've been here for 18 months and we've grown from 25 to sort of just over 80. And the role has changed drastically as the company's changed. Right now, my role kind of broadly sits into kind of 3 areas of responsibility. First is where we've sort of got a genuinely new venture or a genuinely new idea that doesn't have a sort of BAU functional team responsible for that. It'll be kind of investigating whether there's a real opportunity there, understanding what it would take to make it in that space, so that we could potentially tool up a team to run with that going forward. The second one is kind of helping out in the functional teams themselves. So that might be leading on a cross-functional project. It might be under-resourced or sort of a team that just needs a little bit of extra capacity, jumping in and helping them out with that. And the last thing is kind of broadly, support functions for the business. So we're in a slightly more mature space than we were when I started, but I look after our people and office manager, who looks after kind of HR stuff and people stuff. I do sort of the first drafts and the lead on kind of regulatory reporting and investor updates. When fundraising comes around, I do a lot of support with that, and sort of manage our finance and accounting function, which again, provided by sort of outsourced third parties, but sort of being the lead day to day on that for Penfold.
Gotcha. So it's 3 buckets. One is sort of scoping out new business lines, potentially doing the initial digging into them. 2 is like, I'm going to call it SWAT team or bandwidth team. And the 3rd, it sounds like it's kind of a commercial and business operations bucket with you kind of leading overall. And obviously you mentioned that Penfold is now heading towards 100 people and the roles changed quite a lot. If people are thinking about joining an earlier stage startup, what was the role like when you first sort of jumped on board at 25 people?
Yeah, it was very different. So quite a lot of my responsibilities now are kind of fixed around our monthly, quarterly activity cycles, particularly with our kind of newly stood up leadership team. So that'll be kind of shaping the OKRs at the company level and working through that at sort of cross-functional team level to define the priorities for the next quarter, or it'll be kind of helping out with leadership teams, kind of monthly reporting and jumping on fires that might be sort of being raised there. And that's kind of what a lot of my time looks like now, which feels quite structured and frankly quite grown up compared to when I joined. And it was kind of a bit more, the founders have a long to-do list, things get dropped off there, things have been deprioritized, but they still need to be done. And it was much more about sort of picking up those activities and just seeing them through. So I think it shifted much more from kind of a individual executor of things that needs to be done that weren't being done by the founders, to much more a kind of extension of the founding team, sort of helping out with the leadership team to make them sort of as effective as possible. And that's kind of a real reflection of the fact that 25 people 18 months ago, it was much more sort of founder driven, and now it's sort of a much more mature business with sort of much more clear functional leadership and kind of established sort of managerial processes essentially.
Yeah, and in my experience, between sort of 75 and probably 60, that development of a leadership team, founders having to, frankly, delegate and give responsibility, generally hire people who are more senior as well, so the business is sort of growing, and you can afford, and you can also attract sort of more senior talent. So it sounds like you've gone through that transition of the business maturing in terms of how people work together and how that kind of gets reported. You mentioned, for example, OKR structure. Was that kind of in place when you joined, or has that been something that's tied together the leadership team?
No, it wasn't there when I joined, and we've been doing it for sort of 6 to 9 months now.
Right.
And it's sort of still iterating on the way we do that. But yeah, it's absolutely integral to us generating alignment across our teams, making sure that we're not kind of doing the same things in different ways in different teams, or that people aren't sort of pulling in the wrong directions. But also an accountability one. There's so much stuff that we could be doing. Just nailing down the 2 or 3 really important things we want to move the dial on in that quarter, and just focus our reporting on how have we done in the last week, 2 weeks, month, on that really, really important metric that sort of ladders up essentially to the entire business doing well.
And are you effectively running that OKR process? I'm going to call it kind of herding the sheep.
Yeah, so I work with one of the founders who sort of leads on sort of the strategy more than kind of the operations and culture side of stuff, at sort of setting the company level ones, and then we kind of filter it down to the teams, and that will be sort of, I'll be sort of representing the company ones and working with them to kind of come up with bottom up ideas. We sort of define those, we make sure the entire leadership team and the founders are bought into those, and then yes, I'll be the person who kind of ensures that we're sort of tracking against those, reporting on them effectively, and where we see kind of areas that we're lagging behind, bringing the appropriate people in to work out what we can do to sort of resolve those issues.
Gotcha. And just to dig into like how you work with the founders, it sounds like the evolution has become you're actually working more with the sort of senior leadership team now. But if you could describe your kind of week or month with the founders, like what are you doing? Have you got one-on-ones in there? How does that kind of schedule work? And has that adjusted over time, and have you iterated to make it kind of more successful?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely changed. Sort of the working relationship, the ways of working style is just completely different to what it was like when I first joined. I mean, now it's every other week we have a sort of time in the diary, an hour, to go through my priorities, how I'm getting on with sort of my own personal OKRs, because the things that I'm sort of focused on aren't neatly covered by the kind of team ones. So we check in on those. I talk through anything that I need help unblocking, to be unblocked on, to get their input on, to make sure we're aligned on the priorities still, and then kind of take more stock on kind of how I'm progressing against my development goals, and stuff like that. It's kind of carved out formal time every fortnight for me and the 2 sort of commercial founders to align on priorities and solve problems. But then, I think one of the founders, we talk on the phone at least once a day. The other one is in the office most of the day. Those are my pretty organic checking in, every day, every other day or so. Because although I'm doing a lot with the senior leadership team, most of the kind of ideas for projects come from them. They're ultimately kind of the main person that I'm reporting into on progress. Mm-hmm. Even if it is with the leadership team, right? We're trying to make the leadership team as effective as possible for the business. So that's obviously of huge importance to the founders as well.
Okay, so it sounds like now it's once every couple of weeks, but then with a you're working very closely with these people, so it's become quite organic in how you might check in with them kind of daily and weekly and stuff like that.
Yeah,
awesome. And I guess like to think about a little bit about skills, so a much clearer understanding of like where you're spending your time, what the main responsibilities are. If somebody's thinking about a chief of staff role, or indeed hiring a chief of staff, what skills are you kind of really majoring on to do your job well?
yeah. I think there are sort of probably 4 big areas that are really, really important, and they're all closely related and all very much relate to sort of a consulting background, which is
Right.
why I imagine it's so particularly relevant for this audience. One is prioritization. You need to be able to understand the context in which you find yourself in, the opportunities, the problems that you face, and be able to sort of make sure that you are doing the most impactful thing with the finite amount of time that you have. You've got so many different things you could be doing, so many problems to solve, so many opportunities to address. Making sure you're doing the most impactful ones is super important. The other one is problem solving. Although we're a pretty small business, a lot of the problems we're tackling are still very complex. People are right in the weeds of doing the day-to-day, so focused on their area of growth that being able to walk into a situation, understand all the moving parts, try to understand how it all works, and really get to the bottom of what's causing a problem there, or again, finding areas to improve and address opportunities is really important. I think organization is just a massive one. I mean, consulting might seem fast paced, but really you're on one project at a time. It's all very, very hierarchical, very, very clear delineation of who's doing what, and when sort of updates need to be done, when deliverables need to be delivered. But it just completely pales in comparison to being across all the context of this business and juggling all the things that are happening there. So being absolutely on top of just really basic things like how you manage your inbox, how you use Slack, your inbox, to email, the to-do list, your objectives is just so important. And the fourth one, and by no means it's the least important, although it's last, it's just really, really strong EQ. Being aware of how you're going to be perceived in the firm. Often if you're coming into spaces where you're kind of there to help someone address a problem, that would be the area that they've been working on for a very long time. They might have been the first person to start doing, sales or operations in this business. If you come in and tell them that they've done 17 different things wrong, I mean, that's incredibly aggravating and incredibly sort of blind to the context, which is probably a brilliant generalist trying to do something from scratch for the first time with very little resource and very little experience in it. There's no point telling them what the problem is. They probably already know that. So, being really, really sensitive, not throwing around any kind of intellectual weight or being unnecessarily unclear, just like rolling your sleeves up, being sensitive and trying to be helpful. I think it's just so important.
Yeah, and I would say outside of consulting, no matter where you work, that's a really important point, which is outside of consulting, teams are much broader, much more diverse, people coming from a lot of different backgrounds, different skill sets, different experience behind them, different walks of life, different pressures at home and outside of work. And you do move away from a more sort of homogenous environment when you leave consulting.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I guess as you round that all up in terms of, we talked about what you do, the skills you use, like what type of person, I guess, are you? What type of person does this really suit? I mean, you said juggling a few times. So maybe a few reflections on like who would get actually just really annoyed in this role?
It's a really good question. I think you need to be very organized and very relaxed with a slightly chaotic style. Particularly if you're going to work very, very close to founders and you're going to be sort of trusted with sort of their most important topics and challenges. I mean, this is their their career, but really it's their job, but they're also staking something much bigger on this by taking the big risk to run a business that they found that if it doesn't work, you have to pack it up and go home. It's a massive reflection on them, so that all the things they're going to be trusting with you are really, really big topics. So they're going to throw around a lot of kind of, I guess, kind of, there's lots of different ideas, there's lots of different problems. And some of them are going to be sort of very, very, they're going to be felt very intensely. So there's quite a lot of like heat in that. So you need to be quite relaxed about that. So yeah, I think sort of, yeah, just I guess to summarize, kind of to be organized, to be emotionally resilient, I think is a big one. And just, to answer kind of the first part of the question, I mean, I'm just like the most organized, control-y kind of person in my personal life as well. So like, it's quite natural, quite comfortable for me to sort of do that professionally. But I imagine if you found it stressful to have sort of lots of things going on at once and not be able to sort of get all of them done, I can imagine you find this quite stressful.
Yeah, I was going to reflect on that point. I think you have to be comfortable with failure in consulting terms. Consulting projects are very scoped. You genuinely feel like you're moving along and you're succeeding. I obviously wear that founder hat, and you're very close to that founder hat in your sort of proxy role. You just never get everything done, right? And there's always stuff that you forget and you drop, and there's loads of stuff that doesn't work. So yeah, there's something around resilience, understanding and being fine with the fact that probably like you're only ever going to get through 60% of your to-do list, and doing that in a kind of prioritized way. What are the best bits about your job, Aylin? What do you love?
I really like that. It's a bit like consulting, right? I don't have very many kind of fixed remits. It's all quite project based. So I really like the sort of continuation of being involved in lots of different stuff for quite short periods of time, and then seeing stuff through to completion. There's very little sort of monotony and routine. So that's super, super positive. I really like the sort of feeling and involvement of kind of shaping an entire business. I felt like in consulting, you might be involved at sort of a big 5-year strategy planning exercise, but whether that was still being used in 6 months after you left, you don't really know. While you're making very big decisions and involving conversations at a very high level around kind of what this business is going to do, and because it's so small and these are such existential questions, you see that stuff happening like as soon as you walk out of a meeting. So the kind of level of impact that you're having is massive. And I think all the stuff you described around kind of, consulting being such a homogenous environment with lots of similar types of people. I mean, I really like working with lots of different types of people. It's incredibly refreshing to see people with kind of real domain expertise or real functional expertise of very different ways of working styles to me, to be able to learn from them, to take a lot from them. I'm finding that sort of a hugely enriching part of my job.
Yeah, so if someone likes that kind of broad view that you do kind of get in consulting, particularly with a strategy project, but then wants to see that broad view kind of inching forward, it sounds like that would be a great fit. Anything else you think's worth sharing about chief of staff? Why not to do it? Why to do it? Anything you've learned over the last 18 months that really kind of stands out? War stories.
No, the thing I was going to say was, and I was thinking about this as you sort of asked what's good about it, is I so infrequently take a step back and then sort of reflect positively. Reflect at all, and thusly I miss all the positive things. So it happens every kind of 3-6 months when I do performance reviews and sort of do a self-reflection there. But week by week, I haven't hit all of my to-do list for this week, or something massive came up I had to jump on, and everything got reorganized and deprioritized. If you just do that again and again and again, you can always just feel like you're sort of fighting an uphill battle, and it's just incredibly stressful. But then if you take a step back and think about kind of what you've achieved and the impact you've had, it feels absolutely massive. And personally, in sort of comparison to that with the consulting style role previously, you'd look back and you'd go, God, that was a lot of slides and a lot of Excel models, and I learned some new things, I suppose, but it was nowhere near the same. But you've kind of baked in kind of reviews on each of your cases, as it were. So taking a step back, separating the kind of day-to-day, minute by minute stress and intensity of the role, and reflecting on sort of all the positive things you're getting out of it, is the sort of big thing that I have to remind myself to do. And anyone who is sort of thinking about doing the role would be the thing I'd advise them to. And the very fact that you have to do that kind of is also indicative of what the role's like.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to wrap up. So hopefully I've allowed you to reflect, and we can do a monthly therapy session if you want, Aidan. And we didn't even get into any dirt on the founders and
Exactly.
stuff about them, so they've come off unscathed. But look, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate you sharing your stories.
Thanks, Rich.